Good afternoon, everyone. Just a few minutes ago, as many of you have seen, we had another example of the real-world results that the Trump administration is getting in its pro-jobs agenda. Intel CEO Brian Kranzik announced that his company is opening a high-tech manufacturing facility in Arizona that will create roughly 10,000 jobs between the factory itself and its supply chain, which is the latest wave in an economic optimism that's sweeping the country following the president's victory. In his inaugural address, the president laid out an ambitious vision to create 25 million jobs over the next decade. From beginning of his campaign to bringing jobs back to our struggling community has been one of the parts of the president's message that most resonated with the American people. Having hired tens of thousands of people himself, the president is keenly aware of what prevents businesses from being successful in creating jobs in the current economy. President Obama, by contrast, visited the same factory site where this factory will be built during his last re-election visit in 2012, touting the government incentives that were supposed to bring back jobs that have been lost to Asia. President Trump knows that for a business, the real government incentive is the government restraining itself. For too many years, Washington has smothered industry in this country under burdensome regulation. This administration will set out to free businesses from constraints of government bureaucracy and regulation. Under the president's Buy American, High American agenda, the government is going to get out of the way of businesses to allow them to thrive. Just last week, the president signed what we've been calling the one in, two out executive order requiring that every new federal regulation that's adopted, two must be eliminated. This new rule will provide much needed relief for businesses who have been regulated and saddled with an absolutely staggering amount of additional red tape, as much as $1.9 trillion per year by some estimates. In 2014, the National Association of Manufacturers calculated that companies in every industry paid an average of $9,991 per employee to comply with federal regulations. And it's only gotten worse since that study was conducted. By relieving even a small portion of this burden, we will allow businesses to grow and hire more people. Projects that have been stalled or scuttled are being revived in anticipation of the president's pro-growth policies. Last quarter, confidence among CEOs of U.S.-based companies jumped by 4.2% points in the YPO Global Pulse survey, one of the single largest quarter gains in history. This is only the beginning of the president's agenda. Moving on to recap the president's afternoon and evening yesterday. As you saw, we officially announced the 24 people who will be serving in his cabinet on the White House website yesterday. The president looks forward to having all these distinguished, qualified men and women in place as heads of departments and agencies so that our government can start fully working for the American people and enacting the agenda that he brought forward during the last campaign. The president spoke with two foreign leaders yesterday. During his call with President Rajoy of Spain, the two leaders discussed our shared priorities, including efforts to eliminate ISIS. The president already additionally reiterated the United States' commitment to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and emphasized the importance of NATO allies in sharing the burden of defense spending. President Trump also spoke with President Erdogan of Turkey, during which he conveyed U.S. support to Turkey as a strategic partner and NATO ally and welcomed Turkey's contributions to the fight against ISIS. Last night, the president had an incredibly meaningful visit with current officers who enrolled in the Green Berets qualifications course. These young men and women who will be at the tip of the spear serving our country in some of the world's most dangerous places as intelligence officers. The president told these brave young soldiers how proud he was of their commitment to risk everything to keep us safe and how humbled he was to serve as their commander-in-chief and that they could always count on him to have their back. Also yesterday, the Department of Justice presented its arguments before the Ninth Circuit Court in the case concerning the temporary restraining order on the president's national security executive order. Again, as I did yesterday, I want to emphasize that the issue before the Ninth Circuit right now is extremely narrow. The question is simply whether or not the president's executive order, which we maintain is fully lawful under the Constitution and U.S. Code, should remain in effect while the courts actually consider it on its merits. We expect the court to issue a decision on this matter soon, and we will have a statement once that's done. Today, the president spoke before the major cities' police chiefs and the major county sheriffs' winter conference. In his remarks, the president reiterated his commitment to a great national partnership between his administration and law enforcement. While there are many things that the federal government can do to improve safety in our communities, it truly rests with the police officers, sheriffs, and deputies who risk their lives every day on our streets. And their mission is critical to the future of this country. These brave men and women have a true friend in the White House. And as the President said many times, we must protect those who protect us. He will continue to do that throughout his administration. Later this afternoon, the President will participate in a standing legislative strategy meeting of his team here. The team has been working around the clock to engage lawmakers and get the President's agenda moving through Congress. Yesterday, the Vice President attended the Republican policy lunch where he discussed how the administration will work with the Senate to deliver results for the American people. Of course, the Vice President also cast a historic vote for Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos on the floor of the Senate and then later swore her in his office across the street. The larger Intergovernmental Affairs team is maintaining direct communications to state, local, and tribal leaders so that we know what issues are affecting local communities. So far, they've contacted all GOP state speakers of the House, state Senate presidents and attorneys general, and all but 8 GOP state Senate majority leaders. Our legislative team is also obviously engaged in Judge Gorsuch's nomination. He had another full day of meetings in the Senate with both Republicans and Democrats. He met this morning with Senators Flake and Heitkamp, and this afternoon he'll meet with Senators Cotton, Blumenthal, McCaskill, and Heller. We're also pleased to see another Democrat, Senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire, come out and say that the eminently qualified Judge Gorsuch deserves an up or down vote. That brings us now to 9 total Democrats who have come out and expressed a willingness to treat Judge Gorsuch fairly. We hope more Democrats will continue to join their colleagues in fulfilling their constitutional duty to offer advice and consent on the President's nominee. Also on the Hill, we expect Attorney General-designate Sessions to receive a full vote on the floor of the Senate tonight. As unfortunately has become commonplace in the Senate, Democrats once again spent hours last night in a counterproductive discussion about one of President Trump's clearly qualified nominees, not to mention one of their peers. Senator Sessions has a long and distinguished legal career, serving as both the U.S. Attorney of the Southern District of Alabama and also as Alabama's Attorney General. The President looks forward to Senator Sessions' return to the Department of Justice, where he will continue his service to our nation as our chief law enforcement officer. We also anticipate votes later this week on Secretary-designate Price and Mnuchin. Finally, before I open up for questions, the White House has spoken with the governor of Louisiana about the severe weather in the Gulf Coast. We've also made contact with the mayors of the affected areas. FEMA is monitoring the situation around the clock and is in the process of deploying teams to support response and recovery activities. At this time, there have been no additional requests for federal assistance, and we'll update you should that change. With that, let me go to the first question from Curtis Fuller from WLWT NBC in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Well, good afternoon. Cincinnati, among other cities, has recently voted to become a sanctuary city. City leaders here are vowing not to enforce federal immigration laws without a specific request. They also say they want to be open and welcoming to refugees. My question today, how will President Trump respond? Will Cincinnati face economic or other sanctions, including, for example, funding of the Brent Spence Bridge, which he said he would fund when he was on the campaign trail?
Thanks, Curtis. As I've noted before, at the end of the day, this order is about 2 things. 1, keeping our city safe, and 2, respecting the hard-earned taxpayers who send their money to the federal government. And the President's going to do everything he can within the scope of the executive order to make sure that cities who don't comply with it, counties and other institutions that remain sanctuary cities, don't get federal government funding in compliance with the executive order. I think more areas like Miami-Dade down in Florida understand the importance of this order, and we hope cities like Cincinnati and other communities around the country follow their lead and comply with that. With that, Anita Kumar.
I have 2 questions. The first one is, can you tell us who is paying or how this is happening with the Prime Minister Abe's visit to Mar-a-Lago? Who will be paying for that? I asked the White House yesterday. They referred me to State. State referred me to the Japanese government, who didn't respond. It seems as if the Prime Minister was paying and the money was going to Treasury, as previously discussed before.
You mean when he travels here or to
Mar-a-Lago?
Okay.
Then it seems the White House would know that.
Let me get back to you on that. I will follow up with you. So
okay.
On the exact financing, I'm not sure how that flows, but I'd be glad to find out.
Okay. Second question was, during the hearing yesterday that you talked about, Ninth Circuit, there was some discussion about whether there needed to be a tweak to the executive order that to make it clear that legal permanent residents would not be included. in that, and there was some back and forth on that. Will there be a tweet? Will there be a?
Well, I think there was further guidance that I spoke about that went out. I think it's been a week ago. Correct me if I'm wrong, but and talked about. We wanted to make it very, very clear that legal permanent residents were not included in that. But again, remember, we're not talking about the merits of the order. Right now, this discussion that happened last night and that the court will be ruling on is specific to the temporary restraining order and whether or not it should be maintained until there's a further discussion on the merits. So, again, I don't want to get into the legal nuances, but right now, the guidance is very clear that was issued several days ago, if not a week ago, that this is not about legal permanent residents. So that they are excluded from this, and I don't know why there would be that discussion. That clarification has been made. Jeff?
Sean, you said you're not talking about the merits of the order. Was the president this morning talking about the merits of the order when he called it disgraceful, the hearing that he heard last night?
He wasn't arguing before the Ninth Circuit, Jeff. The last night was a motion before the Ninth Circuit on the temporary restraining order. I think the president was very clear that U.S. Code and the Constitution clearly give the president all the authority that's needed to make sure that he can regulate who comes into this country and prevent any acts of, anyone who's not coming to this country in a peaceful manner. The code, 8 U.S. Code 1152, is very, very clear on this. And so I think the president was pointing out the same issue that we had in Boston, which is once we had a chance to argue it on the merits, we won on it. And so I think that's what he clearly did not argue in front of the Ninth Circuit last night. So
understood. They called it disgraceful.
But
calling it disgraceful, is that the type of language?
I think the president, when you look at the U.S. Code and how clear it's written and the authority and power it gives the president to do what is necessary to keep this country safe and regulate who comes into this country, I think it's a very, very clear reading. And the president was very, I think he further went on and said it doesn't matter what level of education you're at. I don't think you could misread this. So I think I think he was very clear, Jeff. So thank you. Daniel Halper.
I was curious about this tweet that President Trump about his daughter's brand.
Yeah.
And then it was retweeted by the POTUS account. What's the standard that the president's doing in regards to his family businesses or that businesses?
Well, I think this was less about his family business and an attack on his daughter. He ran for president. He won. He's leading this country. And I think for people to take out their concern about his actions or his executive orders on members of his family, he has every right to stand up for his family and applaud their business activities, their success. So, look, when it comes to his family, I think he's been very clear how proud he is of what they do and what they've accomplished. And for someone to take out their concern with his policies on a family member of his is not acceptable. And the president has every right as a father to stand up for them. I'm going to go to Norma Garcia from KXTX.
Thank you. In Texas, there is a big push to penalize sanctuary cities. In this state and other states around the country, there is a growing concern among undocumented immigrants whose lives are deeply rooted in the United States and who have no criminal records. My question is this administration ready to tackle comprehensive immigration reform? If so, can you give us a timeline for it? If not, what is the plan to deal with undocumented immigrants who live in this country long term?
Thanks, Norma. I think, this has come up several times. I don't think that anybody doubts the president's concern or priority that is placed on immigration. He's talked about it on, when you talk about a comprehensive approach, he's talked about building a wall. He's talked about making sure we go after criminals in this country. He's talked about walking through the process and addressing DACA and DAPA in time. I think this is a big problem. There's no question that both on the security side and on reforming the current immigration system that is so clearly broken, that he is walking through this already, both in terms of executive action, and then we'll continue to work through Congress. So to your question about the timeline, I think he's already enacting several pieces of it, and he's going to work with Congress to get further down that. Eamon Javers.
Sean.
The same family.
Two for you, Sean, here. Playing off of the question at the back from Daniel there on the business activities that you described the president taking offense to. Nordstrom has come out and says this was not a political decision, it was a business decision. Ivanka Trump, as you know, has said she has divorced herself, separated herself from her business. So how is she being treated unfairly if she's not a
Well,
part
I think
of
there's
this?
clearly a targeting of her brand, and it's her name still out there. Well, so she's not directly running the company; it's still her name on it, and there's clearly efforts that to undermine that name based on her father's positions on particular policies that he's taken. This is a direct attack on his policies and her name and so that there's clearly an attempt for him to stand up for her because she is being maligned because they have a problem with his policies. John, Robert.
Sean, actually to clarify that, the timing of that tweet, it looked like it was right after his president, PDB, during, can you just...
I've heard the conjecture. He was free when that happened. Thank you.
Second question was on the
that was
lawsuit.
actually, that's two.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was a clarification of the one. The president tweeted today that if he does not prevail in court, talking about the lawsuit issue, that we will never be safe. We will never have the safety and security we're entitled to. What does that mean? Does that mean that this is the only tool in his toolbox, and if this EO gets batted down by the courts, we're toast?
No, but I think that when you I mean again, let's 8 U.S. Code 1182 says whenever the president finds that the entry of an alien or any class of aliens into the United States would be detrimental to the interests of the United States, he may by proclamation and for such periods as he shall deem necessary suspend the entry of aliens or any class of aliens or immigrants or non-immigrants or impose on the entry of aliens or restrictions he may deem necessary and appropriate. I guess at some point, if you don't look at that statute and say that the president has the power that Congress and the president have deemed necessary to keep this country safe, you've got to wonder how far you're going to allow that to get eroded. So the point is that at some area, you've got to wonder if the president isn't able to execute on the power that's been vested into him and is codified in U.S. Code, at some point you have to wonder what else is at question. But we have a president that acted 100% lawfully to keep people out of this country from 7 countries that we did not have the proper information to ensure they were coming into this country with the appropriate means and motives. If at some point the president doesn't have the power, as given to him in law, to protect this country, I think that really questions what a slippery slope we're on. John.
Sean,
Of course.
the president said this morning that he paid very close attention to the arguments before the night last night.
Yeah.
Was he happy with the presentation that the DOJ attorney August Flenge made? There was some concern by supporters of this extreme vetting program that he wasn't strong enough. He seemed to be searching for answers, particularly at the point of standing.
I think there was a lot of back and forth during that entire argument. He made some solid points, and I think that he did what he had to represent the president's case and to represent the administration's case on the TRO. I think the president has really focused on the merits of this case and looking forward to getting it back either to the Ninth Circuit or to the lower court or however it has to move. He feels very confident on the merits, and that's where I think his focus has been. So I'm not concerned. I think the president's main concern has been on the merits of this case and making sure that an executive order that was lawfully executed and went through the entire process. Remember, we've got to go back and remember that the DOJ's Office of Legal Compliance vetted this order, deemed it was legal. So we've followed the entire process to make sure that this was done correctly